Hello friends, welcome to Commerce Gyan. In this video, we will discuss about India's GDP controversy. So, what it is? Recently, an allegation has been made on the government that it is overstating its GDP growth rate after the release of quarterly data of GDP value. So, here the main issue with related to overstating of its GDP growth rate, as some highlighted this issue. So, before that, let's understand what is GDP. So GDP is a gross domestic product, is defined as total market value of all the final goods and services in an economy. So it is total market value of all the final goods and services in an economy or in a particular boundary. It is used to assess the size of an economy. So and thus also it perform the performance of the country can be measured both from the one year to another as well as the among the countries, right? So it is to check the performance of a country. Now next concept is GDP growth of GDP. So it can be either due to increase in actual production or due to increase in price of goods and services, or the combination of both above two factor, right? So it can be from both side, that is the production side, if you check, and second is due to inflation. So GDP growth can be by both the factor, one is the production and second is the inflation, and it may be combination of both two. Now let's see what is the nominal GDP. So it is the value of GDP at the current prevailing price. So if we calculate the GDP at the current price, then it is known as the nominal GDP. And next is real GDP. It is the value of uh, real GDP is the value of GDP at some constant price, right? So here we calculate GDP at some constant price, and it is calculated by removing the effect of price inflation, right, from the nominal GDP using GDP or price deflator, right? So in this case of in case of real GDP growth rate equal to nominal rate minus inflation. Since this price remain fixed, it is the real GDP change. It is the ascertain that the volume of the production is undergoing changes, right? So here in this case real GDP price remain fixed, and if any change occur, that means production going under changes. So next concept is GDP deflator, right? So it is the ratio of nominal to real GDP. That means GDP deflator equal to nominal upon real GDP. It gives an idea of how the price have moved from the base year to the current price, right? So as we have discussed, in case of nominal we use we calculate GDP at current price, and in case of real we use at some constant price, that means some base price, right? Some base year, at base year we calculate, that means some constant price, right? So it gives the idea of how the price move from base year to current year, right? Next we have method to calculate GDP. So we have three methods to calculate GDP. First one is income method. So in income method, it is calculated by measuring the sum total of all the factor payment. For example, GDP equal to base, rent, profit, etc. And in second method, expenditure method, it is calculated by measuring aggregate value of final goods and services of all the firm. So here in case of GDP equal to GBA, that is the gross value added, right? And third one is production method. So it is calculated from the aggregate value of expending, right? And here GDP equal to consumption plus investment plus government spending, here government spending, and plus net imports. So in India, it is calculated through income and expenditure method, right? So in case of India, GDP calculated through income and expenditure method. There's a National Statistical Office, that is NSO, under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, release the economic growth rate data, right? The base year for GDP calculation is 2011 and 12 for real GDP, right? Now, what is the controversy with related to GDP? So first is issue of overstating GDP, as we have discussed earlier. So the release of GDP growth rate is 7.8%, which implies that inflation was around 0.2% in the 3 months, right? As we have discussed in earlier slide, that we can calculate GDP by two method. One is the production growth rate, of course, production, and second is the inflation, right? So if we add inflation, then of course real GDP will grow high. So we related to this, this is also issue here. Second, if you see, but in the but in the third quarter, retail inflation was around 4%, and all the 3 months, while wholesale inflation was negative. So here is also related to wholesale inflation and retail inflation. In one, if one was deflate nominal GDP using consumer price inflation, the real GDP would fall less than 4%. So if you deflate with the nominal GDP, then the GDP would fall less than 4%, right? But then if one goes by wholesale inflation, the real GDP will actually be much higher than 8%, right? So if we uh, use wholesale inflation, then real GDP will actually much higher, that is 8% will be more. Second issue with related to controversy, issue of GDP discrepancy. So GDP data obtained from the two method vary due to issues such as the lack of availability of data on the time. So when we get different data from the different sources, so in that case it also create some discrepancy. For example, here is a discrepancy referred to gap between GDP, that means production and income approach, and GDP expenditure approach, right? So here when we get data to different sources, that is, one is the from the production side, and second is the GDP data from the expenditure approach, right? So in that case it create discrepancy, right? So this one, and the NSO in its latest report treat income as a right one. So here it treat income as the right one, and they assume that expenditure must be identical to income earned, which is obvious violation of the international best practices, right? And third issue is issue with WPI. So now let's see what is it is. In recent time, WPI, that is wholesale price index, and CPI, consumer price index, are not moving negative together, suggesting that one of the indices is not reflecting the other real price, right? So here is also related to some discrepancy in the WPI and CPI. It is unrepresentative of economy. So as it does not include services whose share in the consumption basket is large and increasing. So with case of, if you see with case of WPI, it does not include services. Calculation of WPI by Department of Commerce and Industry based on the index of industrial production, which is itself is in criticism, right? So this organization, that is this Department of Commerce and Industry, it already in controversy. It does not provide information on rural and urban areas. As we know, rural area has less share in the production, as well as the state level estimate, which are the all relevant for the public policy. So what lies ahead? That means what can be best practices in case of to calculate GDP actual. So we need more attention has to be given to India's macroeconomic data. So if we shift uh, toward macroeconomic data, then it can be, we can find a good uh, rate of growth or to calculate the GDP. Second is India's inflation indices need to be updated periodically. And third one is wholesale price index. The WPI must be discarded and has to be altered with the new approach, that is the producer price index, which is measure of the change in the price that domestic price producer receive for their goods and services, right? So these three suggestion can be we can adopt to calculate GDP of India. So that's it from this video. If you find this video informative, please do like and subscribe this channel. Thanks for watching.